Okay, so we've done 3 rules so far. Was anyone? Yes, Mercedes wasn't here last time and Allie wasn't here last time, right? So you'll want to get those rules from someone next to you, or even better, watch the video that I posted for it. Okay, so we need to do the next 3 rules. So last time we stopped on the rule about compound sentences. So a compound sentence was one independent clause, so plus another, so 2 or more independent clauses put together. And when you put them together, you use a word like fanboys, one of those words, and then you use a comma too, because fanboys on its own is not strong enough. A comma isn't strong enough on its own, and fanboys on its own isn't strong enough. You need both of those 2 things to put these independent clauses together. There's another way that we form sentences with multiple clauses. So an independent clause, just to clarify, is a sentence that has a subject, I, and a predicate or a verb, run. It's 2 parts, subject and verb, and it forms a complete sentence. This is what's called an independent clause. There are such things as dependent clauses. Dependent clauses also contain a subject and a verb, but they will use a word called a dependent marker word that makes that sentence incomplete. So something like, after I run. Okay, you still have a subject, you still have a verb, but I've added in this word right here, a dependent word that makes it so that you have to have some sort of follow-up to that sentence. Like you can feel it, after I run, what? Like what happens after you run, right? Or you could say something like, because I fell. Okay, like because you fell, what happened? When you add in these kind of dependent marker words, it makes it so the sentence is incomplete. Are you with me so far? There's all sorts of dependent marker words, things like while, or after, or before, or under, like a lot of prepositions that work as dependent marker words, things that make it so the rest of it isn't complete. Okay. 2 scenarios for that. So if you have an independent clause, plus, let's say it like this actually. So 1 independent clause plus 1 dependent clause. You have to decide how to punctuate it. This is called a complex sentence. The other sentence was called a compound sentence. This was a complex sentence. That doesn't really matter unless you're going to be like linguists. Anyone going to be a linguist when they grow up? Is that like their dream? Be pretty cool. Anyway, so unless you're going to be a linguist, it really doesn't matter that you know the names for these things, but just know that they are different from each other. A compound sentence is adding these things together. I run and Karen jumps. A compound sentence. A complex sentence has one of these dependent clauses, and it might go at the beginning of the sentence or it might go at the end. So let's say it's 1 independent clause. So it's indie, then dependent clause. So something like I run because I'm fit. There we go. This is the dependent marker word. We've got subject 1, we've got verb 1, we've got subject 2, we've got verb 2. So I know I've got these 2 different clauses. Here's clause 1, here's clause 2. And I've got my dependent marker word there, so this one doesn't stand on its own, right? If the dependent clause comes after the independent clause, you do not need a comma. This sentence already is punctuated the way it should be punctuated, no commas. If I flip them and I do the dependent clause first, because I'm fit, I run it, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but if the dependent clause comes first and then the independent clause, you need a comma in between them. I don't need a fanboys word. That wouldn't make sense. Because I'm fit, but I run. Like you can tell that that doesn't make sense, right? I don't need a fanboys, but I need to set it aside with a comma. So here are my 2 clauses, same, but I flipped them. If dependent clause comes first, use a comma. Does that make sense? Okay, so the rule to write down is rule number 4. My notes, I wrote it well here. Use commas to separate clauses if sentence starts with a dependent clause. Yeah. Use commas to separate clauses if the sentence starts with a dependent clause. Great. Rule number 4. You use commas to set aside what are called non-essential phrases. Let's call it non-essential information. Decide if the information is essential if you could just remove it from the sentence and still have the sentence make sense. So this could be like extra little details about someone. It could be something like a name or an age or, you know, where they live, their location. It can be something like that. So something like my mom, Lynette, is a great cook. All right, awesome. Here's my mom. Here's her name, Lynette. It's not essential information there that you know that my mom's name is Lynette, right? And so I'm going to set aside that non-essential information in commas. It might work the same way even if it's not a name. My mom, who lives in Orem and is, I don't know how old my mom is, like 56? Is a great cook. Same thing, I get the central message of the sentence, which is about my mom being a great cook. I've set aside this extra information because if I delete this, the central point of my sentence still makes sense. There is a scenario where a name is not always non-essential information though. Like, let's say I had 2 moms. Then you would want to know, let's say my mom Lynette is a great cook and my mom Barbara is a terrible cook. It's going to make sense that it's going to be essential that you know that I'm saying that it's my Lynette mom that is the good cook. That makes sense? So like you want to be able to clarify like what is essential and what is extra. So look at this sentence. I invited my friend Ralph over. What's kind of sad about that sentence? This sentence was true. I invited my friend Ralph.
Wait, never mind. I got it.
Actually, I got it wrong.
There
we go. That one's sad.
If it's not, then it means you only have 1 friend.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, this one is the sad one. It's because here I am renaming my friend here, and I'm giving him this extra information. I'm saying that without that, if I were to just say I invited my friend over for dinner, everyone would know I'm talking about Ralph because I only have 1 friend, right? But if you say I invited my friend Ralph over for dinner, you're saying, oh, I've got lots of friends. I've got Bobby and I've got Sam, and Ralph is just one of them that I'm inviting over for dinner. Make sense? Okay, there's one other thing to know about this rule, which is the difference between the use of the word which and the difference of between which and that. All right. When the sentence is written, oh, I did who? That. All right. When the sentence is written like this, women that are pro-life protested at the Planned Parenthood. We know that the subject here is this whole thing, and it's important that we know that it was pro-life women who believe in like the pro-life principles that are protesting at the Planned Parenthood, right? If I were to change this and I were to say which, we're going to use commas because that equals essential. Sorry, I'm writing this really terribly. And which means non-essential. So if you were to say women, which are pro-life, and I'm not using the right words here, this is a bad example. Women, which are pro-life, protested at Planned Parenthood. In this one, you're saying that all women are pro-life and they can all be protesting at the Planned Parenthood. Did that confuse you more? I'm gonna do another example of that. So let's say it's that. The car that was red ran the red light versus the car which was red ran the red light. Okay, when I say the car that was red ran the red light like this, using the word that and not using commas, what's important to understand in that sentence? Ashton?
The car was red.
Yeah, it's like it was the car that was red that ran the red light. Maybe there was a yellow and a white car all there at the intersection at the same time. It was the red car that ran the red light, right? And then in this one, the car which was red ran the red light. That's kind of suggesting that there was only one car there, and you're like, oh, this is just extra to know that it was red. But we all know who ran the red light. Okay, last rule. That's right, I only put 6 rules down on that sheet, right? Okay, cool. Last rule is that, pretty easy. Use commas after long prepositional phrases at the beginning of sentences. So something like, oh, and long means 4 or more words. So if you were to say, like, after the bombing, people started to clean up. What's the subject of that sentence? People, yeah, people is the thing that is acting in that sentence, right? And then what are they doing in that sentence? Cleaning up, yeah, good. And then we've got this like whole thing here at the beginning. This is what's called a preposition. I don't know if you've learned about prepositions, but they tell you where something is in space and time. And so here you're saying at the time, after the bombing, that's when our subject started doing their thing. It's only 3 words after the bombing. You don't need a comma in that one. But if I were to add after the terrible bombing, now it's 4 words, good idea to use a comma. So it's 4 plus words on prepositional phrases. All right, does anyone have any questions about any of these rules? Yes. Yes, sorry. This one's number 5, and this one's rule number 6. I'm just randomly writing numbers out there. Don't correspond to anything. Okay, cool. Then flip over to the corrections. I want you to correct sentences 1 and 2 by adding commas if they need it. Okay, now with the person next to you, I want you to find the rule that explains why you do or do not need commas in those 2 sentences, and just write it right underneath. Like you need a comma because of this rule, or you don't need a comma because of this rule. So do it for both of those 2 sentences, and talk to the person next to you. Make sure you got it the same one.
Something about the first one. Double check that first one, see if you need the comma.
That's your comment.
Okay, I want you to take a look at number one. You do not need a comma in number one. And so I want you guys to discuss why you don't need a comma in number one. Okay, tell me, why don't you need a comma in number one? I know you see the fanboy word, right? And you're like, and that's a fanboy, it needs a comma, but why don't you need it? Richard?
So like in the second half, you need the subject and verb. In the first half, the subject is we, and the verb will be left the same answer. But in the second half, this will be.
Exactly. If you don't repeat that subject, it just means that the subject at the beginning is doing two things. He is both leaving the scene of accident and trying to forget that it had happened. And you don't want to divide a subject from the actions that they are performing unless you repeat that subject again. Okay, number two, where do the commas go in number two? Ashton?
Right after while and right after while.
Yeah, awesome. And somebody else explain to me why we need those two commas there, Jack.
Which is like, which means it's unessential.
Yeah, cool. So anytime you see which or that, you already know, you don't even have to do any more work to decide if it's essential to the sentence, because which means that it is inessential. Okay, cool. You can put that away. Then you're gonna get out the short story, which everyone keeps telling me it's not